on, chill.
Oh, cool hats.
No, your mother and I are a pair of underwear.
No, well, you gotta have the egg, Brad. You give me this. I've got the 7 grain. And this is the bracelet. Well, that's the sourdough. This is the sourdough. You start with that.
Hello, welcome back. If you watched our previous video about The Cosby Show, you saw the dark behind the scenes, the power conflicts, the creative tensions. But that was just the surface. Today we're going to dive into secrets that practically nobody knows, stories that were buried for decades, what really happened to the actors after the cameras stopped rolling, and revelations that will surprise you even if you think you already know everything about this program. Leave your comment if you remember these actors, if you followed their careers after the program, because what I'm going to reveal today is about the long-term consequences, about lives that were deeply affected by being part of this television phenomenon. Let's start with Jeffrey Owens, who played Elvin Thibodeau, Sandra Huxtable's husband. Owens appeared in dozens of episodes during several seasons, was an important recurring character, had significant lines, participated in main plots. For any actor, this would be a dream role, massive exposure on one of America's most watched programs, a guaranteed springboard for a solid career in Hollywood. But the reality was completely different, and here's something that will shock many people. In 2018, Jeffrey Owens was photographed working as a cashier at a Trader Joe's supermarket in New Jersey, earning $11 an hour, 30 years after being on one of the most successful programs in television history. The photos went viral, and initially there was a wave of mockery on social media, people laughing at an actor who had fallen so low that he was working at a supermarket. But Owens responded with impressive dignity, giving interviews where he explained that he never stopped acting, but that acting jobs were inconsistent, and he needed to pay his bills, so he worked various jobs to support himself while continuing to audition and accept small roles when they appeared. He refused to feel shame about honest work, and his response transformed the narrative from mockery to admiration. But here's the question nobody was asking. How does someone who was on a program that generated billions of dollars end up needing to work as a supermarket cashier at 60 years old? The answer has several layers. First, supporting actors on television programs in the 80s, even extremely successful programs, didn't earn as much as people imagine. Owens probably received a few $1,000s per episode, maybe $10,000 to $20,000 in the best times, which seems like a lot, but isn't a fortune that guarantees retirement, especially after taxes, agent, manager, and all the other costs of being a professional actor in Los Angeles. Second, actors don't receive significant residuals unless they're main cast members with specific contracts, so when The Cosby Show went into syndication and continued generating revenue, Owens probably received checks for a few cents or dollars, literally. Third, and this is crucial, being on The Cosby Show ended up being as much a curse as a blessing for many actors. After the program ended in 1992, Hollywood was saturated with actors who had been on 80s sitcoms, all competing for the same limited roles. Jeffrey Owens was a middle-aged black actor, competing with hundreds of other middle-aged black actors, many with equally impressive resumes, for a very small number of available roles. And here's something the industry doesn't like to admit. There's severe racial typecasting in Hollywood, and black actors were frequently only offered certain types of stereotypical roles that Owens refused to accept. So he worked when he found roles he respected and did other jobs in the intervals. It's a brutal reality that dozens of actors face, but which is rarely discussed publicly. Jeffrey Owens' story raises larger questions about what happened to the rest of the Cosby Show cast after the program ended, and this is where we discover disturbing patterns. Sabrina LaBeouf, who played Sandra Huxtable, the oldest daughter, had a particularly frustrating experience. Sandra was strangely absent during much of the program, appearing sporadically despite supposedly being part of the family. There were creative reasons for this. The character was added after the pilot had already been filmed, because audience testers asked why a family with 4 daughters didn't have an older one, so Sandra was retroactively created. But LaBeouf always felt that her character was never fully integrated or adequately developed. After the program ended, LaBeouf struggled to find consistent work in Hollywood. She made episodic appearances on various programs. had some small film roles, but never managed to establish a solid second-tier career as she hoped. In rare interviews she gave over the years, LaBeouf spoke diplomatically about her experiences, but occasionally let slip frustrations about being typecast, about going to auditions where casting directors saw her only as Cosby's daughter and couldn't imagine her in other roles. Eventually, she changed careers, focusing on interior design and moving away from acting almost completely. If you're finding these revelations surprising and want more in-depth analyses about what happened to actors from classic programs, subscribe to the channel because we have many more of these stories to tell. Tempest Bledsoe, who played Vanessa Huxtable, the middle daughter who always seemed to be forgotten in family plots, had a different but equally revealing trajectory. Bledsoe was just a child when the program began. She was 9 years old and grew up completely in the spotlight and under Bill Cosby's influence. She frequently spoke about how Cosby was a father figure to her, how he advised about education, about career, about life. But there are more complex layers to this relationship that only emerged later. Bledsoe went to college while still doing the program, attending NYU, and Cosby was deeply involved in this decision, essentially demanding that she obtain higher education even if it meant balancing classes and filming. After The Cosby Show ended, Bledsoe managed to get some television work, more than some of her castmates, including her own short-lived program and regular appearances on other shows. But she never achieved the level of success that her exposure on The Cosby Show suggested she should, and when the accusations against Bill Cosby finally became impossible to ignore, Bledsoe was in an impossible position. She had spoken publicly for years about Cosby as a mentor and father figure, had credited him for much of her success and personal development. Then suddenly, she had to reconcile this personal relationship with horrible revelations about crimes he had committed. Bledsoe gave a particularly revealing interview where she spoke about this experience, about how devastating it was to discover that someone she admired so much was capable of such terrible things, about the guilt she felt for having defended him for so long, about questioning her own judgment. She also spoke about something that is rarely discussed, which is that Cosby's victims were often young women in the entertainment industry, and that she herself was a young woman in the industry working close to him for years. The implication, unspoken but clear, was that she sometimes wondered if she was lucky, or if there was something about her specific situation that protected her. It's extremely difficult psychological territory to navigate, and her interview was brave in its honesty. Keshia Knight Pulliam, who played Rudy Huxtable, the youngest daughter and perhaps the program's most beloved character, was only 5 years old when The Cosby Show began. She was absolutely adorable, had impressive natural comic timing for such a young child, and became one of America's most famous child stars. Cosby clearly favored her, gave her some of the best lines and moments, and treated her like a sort of granddaughter on set. Pulliam essentially grew up within the Cosby Show universe, with Cosby having enormous influence over her childhood, education, and development. When the program ended, Pulliam was 13 years old and faced something many child stars face, the impossible transition to adult roles. She went to college, obtained her degree, and tried to resume her acting career, but discovered that Hollywood saw her only as Rudy, the cute kid from The Cosby Show, and couldn't offer her serious adult roles. She worked inconsistently for years, making occasional program appearances, participating in reality shows, trying to stay relevant and employed in an industry that had little interest in grown-up former child stars. Pulliam's relationship with Bill Cosby remained close for years after the program ended. He was even a groomsman at her wedding, and she spoke publicly about him as a father figure and mentor. So when the accusations exploded, Pulliam initially defended him, making supportive statements that caused enormous controversy and backlash. She was harshly criticized, accused of putting personal loyalty above justice for victims, of being in denial about who Cosby really was. Eventually, she backed down and made more careful statements, acknowledging the victim's pain, while expressing personal confusion about reconciling the man she knew with the crimes of which he was being accused. But here's something very few people know. There were rumors within the industry during The Cosby Show's own production about Cosby's inappropriate behavior, and these rumors were actively suppressed. People who worked on the production, Not main cast members, but technical crew, assistant writers, support staff, whispered about things they had seen or heard, about young women who came to the set for meetings with Cosby and left looking disoriented or disturbed, about behavior that seemed wrong, but that nobody felt able to question because he had absolute power. There was at least one occasion where a junior female employee tried to raise concerns about something she had witnessed and was immediately fired, with production executives making it clear that making accusations against Bill Cosby was guaranteed career suicide. NBC knew, or at least key people within NBC knew or suspected things, but The Cosby Show was too valuable financially, too culturally important to risk investigating or questioning. So any whisper of impropriety was immediately stifled, people were silenced through intimidation or payments, and the protection machine around Cosby continued functioning perfectly. And here's another secret that was buried for decades. There was at least one episode of The Cosby Show that was filmed but never aired, because it dealt with a theme NBC considered too controversial. The episode dealt with a friend of Theo experiencing sexual abuse, and although it was handled with sensitivity and had important messages about protecting children and reporting abuse, NBC executives got nervous about associating The Cosby Show, which was seen as safe family programming, with anything related to sexual abuse. So the episode was completely archived, and most people involved in the production were instructed to never discuss it publicly. The horrible irony of this, considering what we know now about Cosby, is almost impossible to process. He was supervising a program that occasionally tried to address serious issues of abuse and protection, presenting himself as a moral educator and defender of family values, while supposedly committing horrible crimes behind the scenes. The cognitive dissonance is absolute and raises disturbing questions about how much of Cosby's public persona was conscious performance versus genuine self-delusion. Tell me in the comments what you think about this, how you process this contradiction between public image and private reality. Malcolm Jamal Warner and Felicia Rashad, whom we already mentioned in our previous video, had post-Cosby Show experiences that also reveal interesting patterns. Warner managed to maintain a reasonably consistent acting career, working on various television programs over the years, but never reaching the level of stardom that his role on The Cosby Show suggested he should. He also became a musician, pursuing creative passions outside of acting, and spoke occasionally about how being known primarily as Theo was simultaneously a blessing and a prison. Rashad, being an established theater actress before The Cosby Show, managed to return to theater after the program ended and had a respectable career on Broadway stages and in occasional television roles. But she also never became the first-tier star that her performance as Claire Huxtable suggested she deserved to be. And when she publicly defended Bill Cosby after the accusations became public, making statements that seemed to question the victim's credibility, there were severe consequences. She was forced to retract, lost academic positions, faced protests when she appeared in theatrical productions. Her loyalty to Cosby, whether based on genuine friendship or denial about who he really was, cost her dearly professionally and reputationally. There's also the issue of long-term financial compensation that is rarely discussed. When The Cosby Show went into syndication after its original run ended, generating continuing revenue through reruns, DVDs, and eventually streaming, the main cast members received residuals, continuing payments based on the program's continued success. But these payments varied dramatically, depending on the individual contracts people had negotiated. Bill Cosby, being executive producer and star, received the largest portion of the revenue. Felicia Rashad and Malcolm Jamal Warner had reasonable contracts and received decent checks, but the other cast members, especially those in supporting or recurring roles, received very little. And then, when The Cosby Show was removed from most platforms after Cosby's convictions, these residual payments essentially stopped. People who were counting on some passive income from a program they had worked on decades ago suddenly discovered that this income source had evaporated. For someone like Jeffrey Owens, who was already struggling financially, this was one more blow. And here's something that should outrage anyone with a sense of justice: Bill Cosby, even imprisoned, still owned rights and profit participation in The Cosby Show. So when platforms like Amazon eventually began making the program available again, he was receiving money while some of the actors who worked with him were struggling to pay bills. If you think this is unfair and want us to continue exposing these realities of the entertainment industry, please subscribe to the channel and share this video. There are also stories about what happened during occasional cast reunions over the years. There were some attempts to do special reunions or retrospectives, particularly at milestones like the 20th or 25th anniversary of the program. But these reunions were often tense and uncomfortable, with certain people refusing to participate, others attending but keeping their distance from Bill Cosby, and a general atmosphere of forced politeness instead of genuine celebration. People who attended these reunions describe how strange it was to see everyone together again, remembering the backstage tensions that had never really been resolved, just buried by time. Lisa Bonet, whom we discussed extensively in the previous video, had one of the most dramatic exits and one of the most interesting post-Cosby careers. She consciously distanced herself from mainstream Hollywood, making artistic choices that were deliberately opposite to the type of family image of The Cosby Show. Her career was less traditionally successful than it could have been if she had followed a more conventional path, but she clearly prioritized artistic integrity and personal autonomy over commercial success. And when the accusations against Cosby became public, Bonet was notably silent, not defending him but also not publicly condemning him, maintaining a silent dignity that contrasted with the more inflammatory statements of other cast members. Another rarely discussed aspect is The Cosby Show's impact on the actors' personal relationships and families. Several cast members went through divorces during or shortly after the program, and although it's impossible to attribute direct causation, the pressures of fame, the demanding filming schedules, and the intensity of working on a successful program for years certainly contributed to stress in personal relationships. Tempest Bledsoe and Malcolm Jamal Warner dated for a time during and after the program, a relationship that was kept relatively private at the time, but that added another layer of complexity to the cast dynamic. There's also the question of how individual actors dealt with the fame that came from being on The Cosby Show, particularly the children. Keshia Knight Pulliam had bodyguards at elementary school because she was so recognizable, a profoundly strange experience for a child. Tempest Bledsoe spoke about how difficult it was to make genuine friends because she was never sure if people liked her or just wanted to be around someone famous. Malcolm Jamal Warner struggled with expectations about perfect behavior, feeling he was constantly being judged and watched. These particular pressures of childhood fame left lasting marks that affected their adult lives in ways they're only beginning to discuss publicly now. A particularly disturbing secret that emerged years later involves how security on The Cosby Show set was handled, especially regarding child actors. Although there were supposedly protocols to protect children, including tutors on set, limited working hours, and supervision by parents or guardians, the reality was looser than the rules suggested. There were moments where children were left in the care of adults on set without adequate parental supervision, situations that in retrospect were potentially problematic. There's no evidence that anything inappropriate happened specifically with The Cosby Show children, but the environment wasn't as safe or well supervised as it should have been, and this is disturbing considering what we now know about the main adult on that set. So when you put it all together, The Cosby Show left an extremely complicated legacy, not just culturally but also in the individual lives of dozens of people who were part of its production. Some managed reasonable careers and satisfying lives, others struggled with financial, professional, and psychological consequences that persist decades later. All were forced to deal with the destruction of the program's legacy and the horrible revelations about its creator and star, having to reconcile personal memories and professional experiences with truths impossible to ignore. It's a story about how commercial success and cultural impact don't protect people from exploitation, about how power structures in Hollywood function to protect the powerful at the expense of the vulnerable, about how the consequences of decisions made decades ago continue reverberating in people's lives today. And perhaps the most tragic aspect of all this is that the genuinely good work that many of these people did, the performances that were truly excellent, the positive cultural contribution that The Cosby Show had in showing a successful black family on American television, all of this is now irreparably tainted by association with horrible crimes. Actors who worked hard, who were talented professionals, who created memorable characters that touched millions of people, now see this work as something too complicated to celebrate, too complicated even to acknowledge. It's an injustice in layers that has no easy or satisfying resolution. Leave your comment saying what you think, how you deal with this complicated legacy, if you can watch the program today, or if it's too tainted, because there are no easy answers to any of these questions. Thank you for watching. Subscribe for more analyses like this and see you in the next video.